Welcome back, faithful politics listeners and viewers, if you are watching us on our YouTube channel. I am your political host, Will Wright, and I am joined with your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. Thanks, Will.
And with us this week, we have Professor Mohammed. I'm gonna butcher this, so forgive me. We have Professor Mohammed Abu-Nimer. He's an American expert on conflict resolution and dialogue for peace. He's a full professor at the American University School of International Service and International Peace and Conflict Resolution, which is based in Washington, D.C., and it's the largest school of international relations in the United States. And we are so happy that he decided to spend some time with us to help us figure out how to make peace in the Middle East. So welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you. That's a big task in 1 hour to do the peace in the Middle East.
Yeah, we're going to solve it here today. Forget the Camp David Accords.
That's
They're
right.
behind us.
That's right. So I guess maybe just to start us off, like, what got you into this kind of work? What motivated you to sort of tackle this seemingly gargantuan problem?
Well, I'm not sure if I've had any options. I myself is a Palestinian who grew up in Israel itself and went to school and university there, and always lived as a Palestinian minority in Israeli Jewish state. So I've had to deal with the conflict from early childhood, and then also through my teenager life, and also through my university undergraduate and graduate, and I've reached this conclusion that as well was really early my university time, that such conflict and such complexity will not be solved through militarization and weapons, and we have to try other options. And I've been working on peace building and dialogue and conflict resolution all over the world, mostly in conflict areas. And once I left that conflict in 1989, I came to do my PhD here in the US, and I have a PhD in conflict resolution, one of the first from George Mason, one of the first people to have such a degree in the early 90s. And then you see that it's not really only Israel-Palestine, but there are many other conflicts around the world, even in the US here and in Europe, that all suffering from the same virus. The problem of deep-rooted identity conflicts exist all over the world.
Yeah. So as a Palestinian, do you have any friends, family, relatives over there currently?
Yeah. Actually, my entire family is in north of Israel, in the Palestinian village in the north of Israel, in the Galilee, but also have families in Lebanon, and we have distant relatives in different parts of the Arab region. We are like any other Palestinian family, have refugees and people who were displaced since 1948, and we are in different parts of the world. In Gaza, we have a very distant relatives, but again, those we lost contact with them for many years now. But again, the majority of the family is inside the Galilee.
Oh, gosh. Is everybody okay? As far as you can tell?
Yeah, they are. They're all confined to one small village, and they are basically, they don't go to work, and they're trying to take care of their children. There were many of them, number of them living in the south, and they have to go back to the headquarters, I would say, to the core family with the grandparents, and they're waiting for this madness and nightmare to be over so they can resume their normal life as well.
Wow.
That's amazing, man. I'm really sorry that your family has to go through this kind of thing. It's really terrible. I don't think any family should have to, or loved one should have to endure this kind of conflict. So
Thank you.
just
Thank you for
know
your
that.
sympathy.
Absolutely.
Yes, and thank you
So,
for it.
oh yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And it's heartfelt. I mean, we're just so concerned, and so concerned as a Christian pastor. I'm just so, I think about how Jesus would view these conflicts, and I think he would view them with a lot of grief, a lot of pain, is my sense. And yeah, I just wish that that didn't happen. I know there's really good people on both sides, and I know the demonization that we do in America, and just human nature to demonize the other side. It's just my prayer is that cooler heads prevail in this. But so, with your extensive experience in conflict resolution, um, how do you assess the current situation going on? Many Americans have heard of this. They know about it, but they don't know it very deeply, and they probably know it unilaterally from one side, as opposed to really hearing from both sides. Either they're very in and on the Palestinian side, or on the Israeli side, quote unquote, and they take sides. So what do you see going on here? What are the root causes? Kind of help us understand, those who are more ignorant in this area.
Yeah, thank you. I think, the best way to understand this, as you said, is to look at the root causes of such conflict. And the root causes of this conflict, go back, to the late 1800. If you want to go back as far as 1882, when the first formal Israeli Zionist group settled in Palestine in modern time. And then more migration and more settlements were created, and by 1917 the British colonial power that was mandated to administer historic Palestine gave the Balfour Declaration the right for Jews to have a homeland there, with no consideration to the context and population, the local. And then, fast forward to the Nazi Germany kicking and expelling Jews out of Europe, and then Jews making their way with the help of the British to Palestine. A 1947 decision of the UN to have two-state solution, and then the war erupts, and Israel is created, and the first Palestinian catastrophe, Nakba, created. And Palestinians are refugees, including member of my family in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and the surrounding countries. And since 48, the Palestinian been struggling at least to have their own state in different phases. And 1967 war, basically Israel completed the occupation of all historic Palestine. And since 67 also, Palestinians began looking for a two-state solution that was fully endorsed by the Palestinian PLO in 1988. And then there was an Oslo agreement in 1993 that was supposed to have a Palestinian state after 5 years in 1998, but they failed to implement that. The UN, the US, and other international community, including Israel as well. And then we moved into another phase of a second Palestinian Intifada, and in 2002. And 2005, the Palestinians had election, and they elected Hamas in response to the frustration with the occupation, Israel occupation of the West Bank and Gaza since 1967. And after Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2000, Hamas took control of the area, and Hamas ideology in many ways provided or was gained enough votes, but unfortunately the Israeli as well as the Palestinian Authority did not recognize that and did not allow the process to continue. fearing that Hamas will be controlling and the territory, also the West Bank. And I think that really impose a siege on Hamas. And Gaza has been under a siege for the past 16 years. And siege means you cannot travel, you cannot move, there is no employment, over 60% unemployment, restriction on all things, all entries, everything has to be verified before entering. Basically, people were living in the largest open prison since 2016, 2006 at least, for the past 16 years. So full generation. Imagine yourself born in 2000, and then basically you are in a prison, open concentration camp, open prison, where you're subject to the brutality of the occupation from the outside, and also for for the pressure of living under Hamas rule, in that territory as well, and nowhere to go. You cannot leave and you cannot stay. And I think that's the explosive situation in Gaza in particular. And I think we got here primarily because the Israeli government, the last Israeli government, which is part of the context, which is the most extreme, and many calls it fascist government, because it has two ministers, right-wing, religious, using religious ideology to justify policies of that call for expulsion and displacement of Palestinian. And those two ministers called Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who belong to who control 8 seats in the Israeli parliament, and they created a coalition with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu went ahead and gave them a free hand in the West Bank, which resulted in over thousands of Jewish settlers, religious Jews, will go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and violate the right of Palestinians to pray, and declare their intention to take control of that holy sites, and also killing over 150 Palestinians in 8 months, and destroying many houses, and also attacking areas like Hawara in the West Bank, and you probably heard of it, and also basically daily raids of Palestinian refugee camps in Nablus and also in Jenin. This increased restriction and attacks on the West Bank escalated, and myself and many others also, and also international community, have warned that this will explode. And I think Hamas saw an opportunity to confront the Israeli policies, and they called it Al-Aqsa campaign, this one, to mobilize and utilize more the religious identity of Palestinians, and also to send a clear message that this is in response to the 16 years of siege, as well to the apartheid system of occupation that exists in the Palestinian territories with no support. Finally, is the issue of the fact that there have been normalization and peace agreements, so-called peace agreements between Israel, Bahrain, and Israel United Arab Emirates, and Sudan, and also Libya, and everybody was waiting for the formal declaration between Saudi Arabia and the Palestinian, and the Israeli, and that meant that there will be full normalization of Israel in the Arab world by bypassing the Palestinian issue, and which means there is no hope for any help, any political agreement. And I think Hamas attack, recent one, came to send those 3 primary messages. One is that there should be no peace agreements between the Arab countries and Israel without settling this conflict peacefully. And also, second message is that the attacks on the holy site Al-Aqsa is very important for the Muslim community that follow Hamas. And the third one is the need to resolve this conflict once and for all, in terms of the ending the occupation in the West Bank and ending the siege on Gaza. That's I usually teach one course, full course, and you read 10, 15 books to capture this.
Of
I should
course.
also say, if this wasn't clear, in the midst of the Israeli occupation and in the midst of all these attacks, also there have been rockets sent from Gaza, not only now but also before, into Israeli cities, into Israeli population, and Israeli soldiers have been killed. Israeli civilians also have been injured by the attacks on the rockets, and also the whole feeling of insecurity and fear that the Israeli population have lived is important to keep in mind. There is an occupation and there is an apartheid. There is a siege over Gaza for the past 16 years, which caused in many ways insecurity, not only for the Palestinian, but also for the Israeli. The big difference is that the Israeli public is supported by the European countries, supported by the American taxpayers, supported by the American foreign policy and administration, and in many ways endorse the dehumanization of Palestinian life, and not giving any recognition that the Palestinian life are also lost, and they need to be this notion need to be corrected here publicly and also politically.
Wow. You know, I appreciate everything that you just said, because I think that what I have been seeing in the news, social media, just conversations is it seems like we've lost the nuance of the situation. People kind of like, to your point, is that we see images of Israelis being killed. We hear stories about murders of babies and whatnot, and then we naturally just kind of group the sides into good and evil. Like, okay, so Palestinians bad, Israel good. But like there's nuance there. I mean, sure, like killing is bad, and beheading is bad. The actions that Hamas took are bad. But also, and I don't think that these two themes are necessarily mutually exclusive. Is Israel's done some bad things as well, and Benjamin Netanyahu isn't necessarily like a great guy. I mean, he's trying to restructure the entire judiciary, like in Israel. It is sort of like the Middle East version of Trump, in my opinion. But so I appreciate you sort of unpacking all that and kind of giving us sort of a broader context. But I want to talk a little bit more about Hamas, though. So you said that they were elected. The country was kind of under Hamas's rule. So the group that attacked Israel, were these like militants? Like, were these actual like a part of like a Hamas army, or like kind of what's sort of the makeup of Hamas, and sort of their connection to the attacks on Israel?
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's important to understand some of these nuances, absolutely. But just a quick note on Netanyahu and his fascist government. In many ways, those ministers who have by January declared their plan that the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank have three options: they either leave, expelled, or they be killed, or they sit silent and accept the fact that there will be Israeli occupation, and they are third or fourth or fifth grade citizens in that area. And that plan was made public. These statements were made by the minister. And what's shocking is that we in the US government refused to meet, and Biden refused to meet with Netanyahu and expelled him and called him in many ways unreasonable, and he was in many ways boycotted in Washington. And also his two ministers were described as and they are terrorists in many ways, because they were accused of attacking civilians militarily, both of them. And the US prohibited the meeting with them. And now, after the October 7 attacks of Hamas, suddenly they deserve to be hugged by Biden. And, there's something wrong in this. And I think people don't realize this. The fact that we are supporting a very, very right-wing, extreme genocide and ethnic cleansing campaign run by this government, and it's very, very painful to see it done in our names and in our tax money. So that's important thing to say. Hamas is a political group that was created in 1987. In many ways in response to the first Palestinian Intifada in 1987, and then it became also with a branch of a militant group, and they have a manifesto that they created that did not accept Oslo, and they refuse any negotiation, and they even called for a Palestinian state, Islamic state, on all the historic land of Palestine. And which is, by the way, it's very similar to the and both Palestinians and Israelis might not like this statement, but the Israeli cabinet has three parties at least who believe that there is no space for Palestinians in the land of Israel. The land of Israel belongs to all the Israeli Jews, all the Jews around the world, and they don't want any negotiation with the Palestinian or with anyone, and they frame the conflict as a conflict of religion between two religions, Judaism and Islam, and those are members of the Israeli cabinet government. Hamas is charter is similar to that in many ways, with one distinction, that Hamas trying to represent people who are displaced, people who don't have access to a statehood. And in 2017, Hamas issued another document that says this is our manifesto, and in that one they accept the two-state solution with Jerusalem, it's their capital, and de facto they also accepted the Oslo arrangement because they've been running Gaza, and they also have had many back channel communication with the Israelis to exchange prisoners and so forth. That's where Hamas come from, and I think what Netanyahu campaign has done this time, and also since 1996, Netanyahu been trying to compare Hamas to Al-Qaeda and ISIS in order to expel Hamas from the notion that they are a Palestinian national group that has a religious ideology to the conflict. And I think this time he succeeded in convincing at least some political leadership in the US and also in Europe, and trying to equate it to Hamas, to ISIS. And I think that's a huge mistake, because it basically continued to dehumanize Palestinians, humanize the case of Palestine, and it delegitimize any claim of Palestinian for freedom and for liberty and for statehood. Hamas is calling, and again, by no means I'm supporting that Hamas or supporting their religious ideology, but Hamas basically tried to respond to the 16 years of siege to the largest, most populated open prison, and they responded, and I denounced, like many other Palestinians, denounced their attacking civilian during October 6th, and even also after. In my views, that doesn't help the Palestinian cause in general. But again, we should be very careful of comparing and get legitimacy, give legitimacy and the green light for what Israel doing in the West Bank and Gaza, under the argument or a claim that they are fighting ISIS and fighting Daesh, Al-Qaeda. This is just part of the campaign of Israel saying that Hamas beheaded children, and we saw that was a lie. This is another one saying that Israel did not attack the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza, which turned out to be, according to today's report of New York Times, they did target hospitals, they did target holy sites, they did target civilians. And this notion that, unfortunately, like you said well in the beginning, that many media and many media and also policymakers have stated that Israel is careful and do not attack civilian. It gives this super morality, and it's in its heart it's really racist, because it puts the pressure on Palestinians to continuously provide the proof that they are human and they have morality, while Israel is the occupier. Israel is the one who have killed 6,700 people so far, with 2,500, 2,600 children, is the one who unfortunately claiming the superior morality in this. And no one is speaking up for the starvation. I mean, can you believe in this? In 23 you put 2.5 million people in starvation mode, with no water, no food, and no electricity and no fuel. UNRWA of the UN today said today will be the last day they can operate. In your fight against Hamas, I mean, this is classic collective punishment and the classic case of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Why should we sit? There was pain in the Israeli side. There was victims in the Israeli side on October 7, and people lived in terror and fear. Yes, but again, there is an international law for how you conduct your war. There's international law in how you treat civilian, and this is 2.5 million people, 2.2 million people in Gaza for the past 19 days are living in hell, and everybody is watching. One of the really painful thing, somebody who work in public diplomacy and dialogue and peace and conflict resolution, it is impossible anymore, if it was even possible in the past, to speak of American and European values of democracy, of human rights. That discourse, that narrative is over in the region of the Middle East and the Muslim region, and even in the Southern Hemisphere, because we see in many ways there is a very distinct political position between European countries, many of them, and American countries versus countries in the South. And it's just like even Queen Rania of Jordan mentioned yesterday in an interview, I think with the CNN, with this is the classic double standard, of Western colonial power that was used. And we thought in many ways that we gain more wisdom, we have more experience, and we will not repeat the same mistake. But here we are in 2023, the world is standing and watching genocide in action in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, what do you make of Hamas's? I guess they have a something in their charter about eliminating the Israeli state. I haven't read it personally, but so in the last we interviewed another professor that studies this conflict carefully, and she had made a mention or a comment about that.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mentioned that earlier. Hamas had a charter, did not recognize the state of Israel. Yes, but again, you have the entire state of Israel government since 1948. They do not recognize the Palestinian people. The Israeli government, current one, has 2 ministers who believe, and their ideology is written in the expulsion of Palestinian out of their land. So, and then you have Israeli political party who recognize Israel, Palestinian, and have a peace agreement of Oslo with them. And then you have also Palestinian political party like Fatah, who also signed a Oslo agreement with the Israeli. But also Hamas itself has issued a document manifesto in 2017. You should look it up, and others who listen to this, where Hamas says we will live and accept the two-state solution, 67 border, Jerusalem as the capital, and also have dismantle the Israeli settlements in the West Bank that has been grown tremendously. Look, in the two sides, there is politically group that does not recognize the other. Is absolutely the difference between them. One has a state and one is exercising its state power. One has over 200 nuclear weapon heads of weapon. One has the most advanced weaponry system endorsed by the superpower of the US. And the other one, who controlled Gaza, controlled an open prison since 2006, have no means of that. Again, we have had a chance of peacemaking in Oslo in 1993, and the Israeli government failed to implement it, failed to meet its requirement to withdraw from the different cities of the Palestinian territory. And unfortunately, the leader of Israel in the past 20-some years, Netanyahu and others, had one goal: to prevent Palestinian state from being created. And everybody knows, we know from Northern Ireland, we know from apartheid South Africa, we know from Philippines, we know from so many conflicts in our history, Will and Josh. Weapon and militarization will not put an end or stop people dream for liberty, for freedom, for dignity. It doesn't matter how much you sugarcoat it in terms of economic privilege, in terms of, improvement conditions on the ground. It doesn't. What matters really is the situation where we can create to have a Palestinian state nearby side of Israeli state that will allow Palestinians and Israelis to live in peace, in dignity, and equality. What we need at this point is the recognition that every Palestinian life is equal to every Jewish Israeli life, and that's the bottom line. And stop this stop this madness of saying there is no end to the Israeli revenge on Gaza.
Yeah, I can totally sympathize with that. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying and where we've come so far. Because in my understanding, right, in very limited understanding, right, but what this is going to represent, and I think that you already know this, you've experienced it, seems like from what you're saying, your whole life. But from my understanding, right, just as a normal American, the idea was, hey, Hamas is a terrorist group. They go and they kill people. They put civilians in the way of weapons and whatever. These are the things that we're hearing, right? Or I'm hearing and I have heard growing up. No, what I'm hearing from you is a different picture. What I'm hearing from you is you're saying Israel and Palestine, they both have governments. Hamas was a reaction to aggression on the part of Israel and Western allies. Is that so? So Hamas is this, attempt to preserve our autonomy, our freedom to worship, our freedom to live the life that we feel like is best for us and our children, right? But the way in which that has taken place is now that Hamas had, they're a military force that uses military means, and so they're gonna attack. Whatever it is that they're planning, they're trying to get freedom, whatever their agenda is. Ultimately, what we're talking about is two government organizations. One government organization has asked for the end of Israel at one point, and the other one has asked for the end of Palestine, but one is more powerful and is backed by the superpowers of the world, and the other is not. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, close enough, Josh. Yes,
Close, close.
close enough in the sense that I train people in peace building and dialogue and conflict resolution all over the world, and I have seen this game played in many parts of the world.
Yeah.
It's similar. It is similar to the racism and the slavery in this country, to indigenous people in this country. It's similar to
Mm.
all conflicts that we have created around the world, we human, in which one group dominates over the other group. In this case, what
Yes.
we have the Israeli government since 1948 have a state recognized by the United Nations and supported, and then you have Palestinian national movement trying to create a Palestinian state since 1948 at least, and they are unsuccessful for many reasons, some internal and some external. The external part is the fact that Israel occupation sits there, and no, there have been 70 some resolution of the UN against Israel occupation, and they all have been vetoed by the American by us, by American foreign policy. So there is a huge
Mm.
asymmetry in this, and the problem, Palestinians have been characterized as terrorists since 1970s because no one speak about state terrorism. What the government of Israel have done since 1948 of displacements, of killing, of administrative arrest, of okay, leave Gaza on the side. Look at the West Bank. The West Bank is run by Palestinian Authority that has a peace agreement with Israel, that has Oslo agreement, that has security coordination with Israel. Still, despite they have been negotiating with Israel since 1993, this is the longest negotiation in the history of a human being. 30 years of negotiation.
That's a lot of time.
13 years of negotiation in which the Palestinian Authority said, we will not fight Israel with weapon, right? What has happened? What happened is more settlements, triple the size of settlements in Palestinian land. Is Israeli prison full of Palestinian people who are arrested. More Palestinian killed in the West Bank in the past year than many other years before also, and no improvement. Is Palestine in the West Bank is like a Swiss cheese cut into small pieces, no mobility at all,
Mm.
no freedom of speech, no a violation of human rights on daily basis. So
Mm.
the issue is not whether Hamas attacks or not. It's wrong to attack civilian. In my view, the whole conflict should be administered non-violently. There
Sure.
should
Yeah,
be
absolutely.
absolutely, but again, what will you do? You tell me, you and Will, you tell me, if you were a Gazan living in Gaza or in the West Bank, and you don't have medicine to treat your children, you don't have food, you don't have water, you don't have access to electricity. Israel since 2006 have attacked Gaza 5 times. This is the 5th time, and every time with the same argument, trying to uproot Hamas. It's time we all learn that the best way to support Israel-Palestine from the US is to support two-state solution, and to put our money and to put our mighty power in enforcing that resolution, rather than put it in one side and support the dehumanization of the other one. Support an apartheid
Yeah.
system. It is time we understand that. And it pains me. It pains me to see my family, my friends, and also
Yeah.
my Israeli Jewish colleagues and the friends that I've had them before, talking and working with them. It pains to see all that suffering. And what's going to happen, even if we destroy every single one of Hamas fighters in Gaza, we're
Yeah.
going to leave 2.1 million people in devastation. what type of generation are we going to have the next one? You know what type of generation? We will basically
A very angry generation.
we're going to remanufacture the conflict, and unfortunately this war has brought us back to the 1970s, where we have to fight each other for basic recognition of the right of the other side to exist. The discourse,
It's so
yeah,
difficult.
it's just very sad.
It's very, very sad. And I feel that with you. And you know, it's interesting because I would love for you to comment on the religious ideologies at play here, right? Because you have Muslim religion and the Muslim theology and Muslim different interpretations on the spectrum. You have Christian theology. And one of the things that my guess and my sense, not only was there political, I don't really understand the political reasons why the United States has backed Israel, as well as I think I may understand the religious reasons that in this, that a lot of Americans, a lot of influential Americans felt like Israel was at the center of an end times kind of, you know, it was just at the center of this end times narrative and reality that Christians believe, especially this idea of dispensationalism, that Israel, like, it has its own unique story that it's going to end up fulfilling in the end. And so what we have to do is you have a lot of Americans that are like, this is helping speed the coming of Jesus, speed the second coming of God, his bringing his institutes of justice on the earth. There's similarity, I'm sure, with the Muslim eschatology and even some Jewish eschatology, although Jewish probably isn't as similar in my sense as it is to even the Muslim and Christian eschatology. And my question is, how do these three ideologies at their core, how have they brought about this conflict in your mind? How have you seen them work out? And then how, if religion is such a major driving force behind some, not the only driving force, but a major driving force behind a lot of these decisions and a lot of these conflicts, it seems to me that religion will have to be part of the solution. Some kind of reframing, some kind of reinterpretation of what it means to live in the 21st century as Jews, Muslims, and Christians in a world that is very, very chaotic. What do you think about the religious aspects of this conflict?
Well, thank you. That's, it's good to touch on that as well. This is, in my view, again, and many others as well, this is not a religious conflict. It's a conflict about national self-determination. It's a conflict over who control the land of Palestine, historic Palestine, or the land of Israel, if you want to use also the narrative of the Israeli self-determination over statehood. And this is the problem where the Jewish yearning, the Jewish national movement for yearning for a homeland, brought the religious, which was the Zionist movement, looking to bring a homeland for the Jews. They merged it with what you describe, the return of Jews to the land of Israel by the
Right.
late 1800s, early 20th, and the Zionist movement got married, even up to the early 30s. Then there was this marriage between the two,
Right.
and religion was manipulated, utilized by the Zionist movement, which in many ways took place during that time when colonial powers like Britain, France, the Italians, the French were basically colonizing the different parts of the Middle East and the Arab region and the Muslim world and Africa and Latin America. So in many ways, they were looking at the places around the world where to settle the Jews for Europe to get rid of the presence of the Jews in Europe, and they looked at Uganda, and they looked at Argentina, and then they also looked at historic Palestine, and the merge with the religious identity provided support for the Zionist project, and they created the State of Israel. And since the creation of State of Israel, they continue to use the religious identity as a mobilizer to justify the control over the land, to justify even the aggression against the non-Jews in that area, and using religion as a justification for war, exclusion, and violence. On the Palestinian side, the Palestinian national movement, again, a secular movement. However, the religious Muslim identity and the Christian identity have been utilized and have been put in the middle of the national liberation movement since the 1960s and even since 1930s. Al-Qassam, Izz al-Din al-Qassam in 1936, he was a religious leader and a fighter and somebody who opposed the British mandate and the Zionist colonial power during that time. And Palestinians' national movement continue to rely on religious identity to mobilize until Hamas came in 1986, 87 and says, religion has to play more and a stronger role in the national liberation movement, and they created their manifesto and they created their religion. So it's a classic case where religious identity is manipulated on daily basis by the two sides to justify their action against each other. With the difference, one has a state and one is seemed to be perceived internationally legitimate to defend itself using religious discourse, while the other is not legitimate because it's not a formal state, and they are also not legitimate in the eyes of many international community. But I think it's important to see it that within the Israeli society there are secular and there are religious. And at least half of the population in Israel do not see in religion as a core reason and a factor for fighting and for politics. And also in the Palestinian side, there are a huge number of Palestinians who do not frame it as a religious war, and their ideology is a nationalist ideology. I think that despite the fact that this is a conflict national over land self-determination, still, in order for us to unlock the misperception, in order for us to establish a trust, to establish peaceful discourse, we have to use and utilize religious sources for peace, because Islam and Judaism and the Christianity, the three faith group in that part of the world, have enough teaching about peace, about nonviolence, about dialogue, about living in coexistence with the other, that Palestinian and Israeli Jews and also Christian, if you want to look at it from the religious perspective, we have to speak that language. You cannot expect the U.S. Special Envoy to go to Palestine, Israel, for the past 30 years and never as a diplomat meet with religious leaders, while you are trying to negotiate the fate of Jerusalem, which is a holy site for Palestinians, for Muslim, Jews, and the Christian.
That seems like a real lack of wisdom. And we had someone on our podcast that actually actually addressed that very thing, where he wrote a book where we had him on, and he talked about how all the different, like how America did so bad in Iraq. One of the huge reasons, and Afghanistan, was because of the religious ignorance of the people that were working with the Muslims there.
Iraq and Afghanistan. So, and I'm not saying you should do, full religious politics. No, but you have to speak the discourse and the language of faith. You have to appeal to the faith, but appeal to it not in an exclusion discourse appeal to it in using biblical Old Testament to justify the attacks on Arabs or on Muslims or a Christian. You have to use the Old Testament in a way to endorse and disseminate and produce a discourse of peaceful living, social cohesion in that area. You have to teach in the Israeli Jewish yeshiva, where religious kids go to school. You have to teach about Palestine. You have to teach about Islam. You have to teach about Christianity. You cannot continue and produce Israeli Jewish religious followers who are in full belief of the negation of the goyim, or the foreigners, as we say in Hebrew. And the same thing. You cannot continue and produce a narrative of Palestinian Muslims or Palestinian Christian that does not recognize the need to live in peaceful and coexistence with Jewish religious groups. That problem do exist. The problem with it, or the issue, the way it exists, is that each of these discourses, they're not equal. They're not equal. And one of the main mistakes that we have in many times, that we look at symmetry, as if those did A, the other side did B. No, Gaza is starving. So Gaza has been 16 years under siege. Where was the international community? Where was the UN? Where was the United States in dealing that? Characterizing Gaza and punishing them for 2.2 million people, punishing them for their election of their political leader like Hamas, does not contribute to peace, does not set a tone for peaceful coexistence, does not set a good tone. And unfortunately, as I'll repeat again, we did not learn the lesson yet. So yes, we need to work on peace through religion, through faith as well, and not do the opposite. Use the faith and the identity to disseminate hatred of Palestinian, disseminate dehumanization of Palestinian, harass Palestinian Muslim and the Christians in their holy sites in Jerusalem, attack and make claims that Al-Aqsa Mosque belong to the Jewish right, to a religious right, and they want to destroy it and establish, to fasten the return of the Messiah. This is a discourse that only contribute to insecurity of Israelis and insecurity of Palestinians.
Yeah. So at the start of our conversation, I had sort of joked that we were going to solve Middle East peace, and I think that everything kind of leading up to my next question is just sort of setting context, and we didn't even scratch the surface. I think that we could probably have this conversation for another 30 years and still miss some things that kind of contribute to what's happening. So I'd love to maybe get your insight on peace building. Like, what will that take? Like, what are some of the different factors or different environmental conditions that have to be present in order for us to even get to a place where we can start talking about peace?
Yeah, thank you. I think at this point where we are, unfortunately, we have to go back to square one of the 1970s to rebuild the trust, rebuild basic trust and recognition in the right of the other side. We have to go back and emphasize the humanity in the Palestinian side, the humanity in the Israeli side. We need to go back and adopt the language that Josh alluded to it earlier, that our faith identity, our faith groups, our scriptures, a call for peace, call for coexistence, call for mercy, a call for reconciliation. That's what are the teaching of the three faiths in that context. We have to go back to this foundation. And we thought in many ways that we have done that in the 70s and the 80s, and hence moved to the peace agreements that faltered or went bad. That I am sure about it, that we have to go back and reinstate our sense of humanity of the other. And we have to have the capacity in our heart to feel the pain and the victimhood of the other side. When we pray, we have to pray for the victims on all sides. That's the starting point. Immediate, we have to call for for ending the siege on Gaza. We have to have a humanitarian corridor for relief, medical relief and food and water to go in before we lose 2.2 million people in front of our eyes. It's a matter of days. That is an immediate. We shouldn't condition, as been done right now by the US, European, and Israel, the relief by any political or military goals at this point. Following that, what we need to happen is exchange and release of all prisoners and all hostages in both sides. Israel have arrested 900 people in the West Bank who are all, they said, affiliated with Gaza in the past 2 weeks. Agreement to stop the bombing of civilians. And I think Turkey, Qatar, Russia, China have already called for international peace table negotiation that begin to look at this conflict in a more serious way. And I think that's down the road. But for now, it's just to stop the suffering of the people in Gaza, and also for Hamas to stop sending the rockets into Israel in order to have the Israeli go back to their normal life, and Palestinian to pick up their wounds and bury their deads. There are thousands of Palestinians under the rubbles of the houses, and they are not able to pull the bodies out and to bury people. There are thousands of people who are injured, over 12,000 Palestinian injured already. So medical relief and food and protection need to be put in. And it is time that the United Nations send its peacekeeping forces to the West Bank and Gaza in order to protect Palestinian civilians, because this what has happened prove that there is no civilian protection for Palestinian, and that is essential. So that the short term, this is what happened. The long term, there need to be a Palestinian state beside the state of Israel, and for the Palestinian people and the Israeli people to live like any other two states around the world, who have open borders, who have the capacity to trade with each other and to visit and have open borders. That's a dream that we all have been carrying. And I was telling my daughter 2 days ago, she was very upset that, I feel sorry, me and my generation, that we subject them, Israeli and Palestinian children. We should have given them a reality that is different, because our parents have lived this reality. My parents are people who lived the Nakba, the first Palestinian Nakba. And now I am in many ways feel guilty that my children are witnessing another Palestinian Nakba. The Israeli parents who are in my age should feel the same thing, that we have failed our generation. We have failed our children. We should have saved them this suffering and those images of children being bombarded or being killed, or this is very hard for people like myself, who have called for peace building and for conflict resolution over 35 years, and have wished that our children will not experience this. And we always call for justice and accountability. So what I'm telling my children is that I hope that justice and accountability will be put in a place in a few years from now, so they and their children will not have to suffer in the future as well.
Yeah. And I really appreciate your words, and I definitely, and I feel like that's a cause that anyone can get behind, that we would stop the war and that we'd find some kind of resolution that would bring peace and would bring a different narrative, a different way of viewing the world. And I really love that. You know, it's funny because as a Christian, especially an evangelical, and especially pretty right-wing evangelical. I mean, I certainly don't consider myself far right, not by today's standards, or maybe by any age's standards, but or recent age, I should say. What is interesting to me is that we have all these people, that Christians, talking about this conflict, and they don't even recognize that there are a lot of Christians in Palestine. So like our brothers and sisters, we have a lot of brothers and sisters in Christ. If you look at the theology, Christian theology is to say, right, that the spirit is thicker than blood, right? We have blood is thicker than water, but the spirit is thicker than blood, in the sense that these are our brothers and sisters, our Christian brothers and sisters that are being killed. And we have to, I think I would just say to any pastor and any Christian, anyone listening to this, people that, I'm pretty conservative. I definitely have become more, some people would say center, some people would say liberal, whatever it is. And I'm totally okay with that. I really am. I feel like I'm at a much better place in my sense of politics than I ever have been. And sense of my own beliefs and my own sense of what's most important and what's not. And I think that I want my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, especially white brothers and sisters in Christ, to understand that we have a lot of, number one, anyone in the image of God, we should be grieved that anything like this is happening. Number two, our own brothers and sisters are suffering. And I think that isn't to say that isn't to come down on a side in this conflict, because what seems like is happening is you have powers fighting each other, right? That's, and you have one power that's way more powerful than the other. And so you have an underdog kind of effect. You have an effect, and people have suffered from that reality. It's, from what you're saying, and I believe it for many, many years. So I just think it's so important to think about this more than just posting, the latest thing that says I support Israel, or even I support Palestine. Just I support peace, and let's figure this out, because this is really difficult, and this is going to affect us if action isn't taken. It is going to affect us. We cannot stay out of the conflict. We already know that, and it's not good. So here's my last question, and this is kind of, we normally go about 60 minutes, so this is kind of the last question I'll give to you to take wherever you like, and then at the end we'll just kind of have people, you tell people how to get, follow your work and get in contact with you and help, be a part of the solution and all that. But we have a really wide range of people that listen to this podcast. We have people that are atheists, have no faith, and we have people that are very, very conservative, right-wing Christians. We have Muslims that listen to the podcast. We have a wide range, right? Democrat to Republican, conservative to liberal. And we have a lot of people that have a very deep ignorance of this issue, including myself, that you're helping to bridge that gap today. So I thank you for doing that. My question is, what do you want everyone hearing this podcast from this big spectrum, besides what you've already said, but what's one thing on your heart that you think is like, here's one thing I need to make sure I say? Like, I got to say this, because if I don't say this, then I haven't really done my job in this conversation. What is that? What do you want to say to this audience? Just speak from your heart, like you've been doing, and what you want us to hear.
Thank you, Josh. Also, thank you for raising again the issue that Christian Palestinians church has been destroyed in Gaza and targeted by Israeli missile, killing 16 or 18 people. And yesterday I had dinner with one of the relatives who had relatives in that church here in Washington area. Christian churches been bombarded and attacked by settlers, Israeli Jewish settlers. What we're dealing with is an ideology based, fueled by hatred against other religion, other faith group. That's what the right wing government in Israel has. The 2-3 things I really wish for people when they hear this podcast is, one is, do not necessarily repeat the lies and the propaganda you hear from one side or the other. Check your information and go beyond the CNN, go beyond ABC and NBC and those mainstream media, and find other alternative media that has more credibility, and also speak to people, reach out to people and speak, so for you to collect the information and make your informed choice and decision to reduce the ignorance as you describe. So please do not follow the headlines only. Dig and read more than 2-3 lines. Two, write to your local politicians, call for ceasefire, call to stop the genocide and the ethnic cleansing in Gaza. That need to happen immediately. Have your political leadership representative be accountable for their simple, one-sided, blind support for a right-wing fascist government in Israel. And the 3, take the time to go to peace activities, type of joint Palestinian, Israeli joint Palestinian Jewish activities that endorse a discourse of peace building, discourse of peaceful living, and one that is based on granting dignity and the freedom for everyone in the region, and sort of do that actively. Contribute to support children, support people who were affected by this war. And your role as an American from outside, Josh, is to speak for peace and coexistence, and to see the life of Palestinian equal to the life of Israeli, and stop supporting the dehumanization. If you have a Palestinian neighbor, comfort them, because right now, after the killing of the boy with the 26 stabs in Illinois last week, everyone is terrified. It is time to express solidarity with people who in your neighborhood, and to reach out to them and stand with them like we do with all our neighbors. These are small things you can do, and it's not very difficult to use them if you take a few minutes of your day. No one expected us to solve the conflict in 1 hour, so we're not expecting you to solve the conflict on your own. But like we stood in the Black Lives Matters, and we supported people after Muslim American after 9/11, and we learned to distinguish between the war and the violence and our neighbors. It's important to speak against Islamophobia, against Palestinophobia as well, that exist now, and to be vigilant against hate speech in your neighborhood, in your schools. That's crucial. This is what I think people can do to be vigilant against hate speech and the blind support of the violence against Gaza.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so good. And how can people keep up with your work? Where can they go to find out more information or even connect with you?
I'm a professor of peace and conflict resolution and the chair of Saeed Abdul Aziz for peace and conflict resolution at American University in Washington, D.C. I'm the president of Salam Peace Institute for Peace and Justice Institute. They can Google these entities, American University in my name, and also Salam and Peace Institute that promote dialogue and peace building all around the world. And if you Google my name, you have enough information out there. I'm trying to do my part in endorsing peace and conflict resolution in the U.S. as well. Thank you again for both of you for your patience and for this platform. And I look forward to be in touch.
Yeah, thank you so
absolutely.
much. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum
as well.
And
peace be with you.
Yes. And so, well, guys, thank you so much for listening and joining us here today. This has been Professor Mohammed Abu-Nimer, and he is wanting us all to reduce the ignorance in our understanding of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so we're hoping and praying that you'll do that. Let us know if you have any questions. You can put it in the comments, things like that. Interact with us on Facebook, the Facebook group, and we'll do the best that we can to get back to you. Until then, guys, thank you. Keep your conversations up, not left or right. God bless, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.